What's up, nerds? North Korea is rising in strength and stature, and we can all thank Russia for that. And China's watching this whole thing play out quite nervously. And honestly, if China's getting nervous about North Korea, then maybe we all should too. Now let's hit on why and how North Korea has been using Russia's desperation from the war in Ukraine to better itself. We're going to talk about how it has been a mutually beneficial relationship. We're going to talk about how this might make North Korea more emboldened to threaten South Korea and the United States and to do all kinds of other stupid stuff. And we're also going to talk about how it complicates the U.S.'s ability to deter North Korea. We're also going to talk about why China is nervous about this whole situation. This is a very interesting story, and I'm excited to dive into this with you. In September 2023, Kim Jong-Un made a series of visits to Russia by train. Among the stops were the Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Vladivostok, as well as the Russian spaceport in Vostochny. While visiting Vostochny, he met with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss some sensitive topics. And then he proceeded to visit a Russian aerospace manufacturing plant before going to Vladivostok to inspect the Black Sea Fleet and meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Shortly before this visit, shipments moved from North Korea to Russia with an unknown cargo. Shortly after the trip, North Korean artillery and missiles began to land in Ukraine. According to one recent report to Congress, this trip is part of a larger relationship which is growing between North Korea and Russia. This is a relationship of necessity, not one out of love. Both sides have something that the other can provide, and right now they see an opportunity for a transaction that will better each other. However, despite all of this, they both remain deeply suspicious of one another. And of course, watching all of this happen is China, who is becoming increasingly more nervous about the way that this relationship is developing and the way that this could impact North Korea and China's own control over North Korea. This is drama of the highest order, with one growing global power jealous of another declining global power, and one of the most volatile powers caught in between. Now, first and foremost, why is this all happening now? We know that North Korea has been deeply isolated and impoverished since the Korean War, and it has really struggled to develop itself over the decades. A lot of that is due to Western and really global sanctions, not only over its nuclear program, but also over its bellicose international policy. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the North Korean economy collapsed by around 50%. The Soviet Union was one of North Korea's biggest backers, providing North Korea with the majority of its aid at the time. So losing that caused its economy to collapse and created a famine in North Korea which killed over 500,000 people. Since then, the rising China has seen an opportunity to fill the void. Russia, while it recovered from the collapse of the Soviet Union, tried to issue loans to North Korea, which North Korea defaulted on, and this created kind of an air of distrust and frustration with North Korea and Moscow, and an unwillingness to help North Korea again in the future. China, on the other hand, became North Korea's largest trading partner, now accounting for about 90% of North Korea's trade. This, of course, granted China leverage over North Korea, making North Korea de facto vassal of China. Despite all of this, at least up until 2017, both China and Russia continued to support UN security resolutions against North Korea, which included some sanctions. However, since 2017, the two have kind of started to break from the UN on North Korea. Until now, Russia has started to request reviews of sanctions on North Korea, saying that some of them aren't even needed anymore, and some of the councils around North Korea aren't necessary. However, having said that, both China and Russia do continue to remain suspicious of North Korea. Neither China nor Russia want to see another war break out on the Korean Peninsula. Both have security challenges in other parts of the world. For instance, of course, Russia has the war in Ukraine going on and some other areas that they're currently dealing with. China has Taiwan and the South China Sea and conflict with India. So there are some, other areas. There's some other fish to fry right now. And North Korea starting a war on the Korean Peninsula would certainly not be optimal for either of them. It also doesn't help North Korea that both Russia and China really have stronger economic relationships with South Korea. And in fact, both of their economic relationships with South Korea vastly outshines their relationships with North Korea. Now, of course, with Russia, this has changed, of course, since the start of the Ukrainian war and some of the international sanctions that have been placed on Russia. So that's kind of starting to change a little bit, but at least with China, the Chinese-South Korean economic relationship has been incredibly strong over the decade. In fact, this relationship may be stronger, at least just because of their shared economic benefit, than the ideological relationship between China and North Korea. North Korea, on the other hand, always needs help, but they need help now more than ever. Despite their general policy of self-reliance, which we all know as Juche, they continue to struggle economically. They still need more external support. In fact, this is really one of the big motivations behind why they continue to make threats against the U.S. and they make noise on the peninsula. You can think of like a baby crying because they just want, they might need attention from their parent. They might be hungry. They might need to go to the bathroom. Well, that's kind of how North Korea goes about it. They just make a lot of noise to get attention, and then that gives them time to negotiate for, some kind of relief. Some of the aid they get through these means, some aid they get through China, and some of the aid they get through illegal activity. Now, of course, everything here changed once Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. And of course, more specifically, things changed whenever Russia found itself in a quagmire in Ukraine. The consumption of artillery ammunition, I think, might have caught everybody off guard, but it might be greater than Russia's own domestic capacity to produce artillery ammunition. We can tell that might be the case because of how Russia has gone about procuring artillery ammunition from other countries. For instance, and this isn't necessarily with artillery ammunition, but with ballistic missiles and precision-guided missiles, they reach an agreement with Iran to receive some of those systems as well as Shahed drones in exchange for other kinds of military assistance from Russia. North Korea, on the other hand, can provide some assistance in this area. Now, in both cases, with Iran and with North Korea, these aren't relationships of love. They have some kind of ideological relationship against the West because both North Korea and Iran, like Russia now, have been heavily sanctioned by the West. And so ideologically, they all agree that they want to, kind of quote unquote, fight against Western imperialism. However, at the same time, there are historic and deeply rooted, suspicions of each other and of Russia. So they can help each other now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's water under the bridge for everything that's happened up to this point. And we've already talked about a little bit with that history with North Korea and Russia. Now, with Russia getting some assistance from Iran, they've also sought assistance from North Korea. And that takes us to the visit in September 2023. North Korea has been a bit of a late bloomer in this whole situation. They seem to be the last pick in gym class, however, they're still getting their number called. And Putin, who is no less desperate for another avenue of support, appears to have relented to meeting with Kim Jong-Un. And that takes us to what was Kim Jong-un's first foreign visit since COVID. A significant moment. And remember that detail because it's important. Kim Jong-un traveled by train from North Korea to Russia in September 2023. Traveling by train to Russia has been somewhat of a tradition for the Kims. His grandfather and his father both did it quite frequently, at least during the Soviet Union. However, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, things have kind of dried up between North Korea and Russia. Now, we've already talked about the visit, how he met with Vladimir Putin at the spaceport, how he visited an aerospace manufacturing plant, how he visited the Black Sea Fleet. Now, in his visit to the Cosmodrome, where he met with Vladimir Putin, it appears that Kim and Vladimir Putin discussed the possibility of Russia helping North Korea's space program, like helping North Korea to send satellites into space, as well as potential military support for Russia. Now, officially, no agreements were made on this trip, and it might be that this trip was just, kind of an exploratory meeting between the two leaders. However, there's some evidence that some sort of an agreement has risen either as a result of this meeting or prior to this meeting. As of May 2024, about 8 months after this meeting occurred, over 3 million North Korean artillery shells have made it to Ukraine, being shipped in over 10,000 shipping containers. Over 40 North Korean ballistic missiles have landed in Ukraine. North Korean workers also appear to be gaining more work opportunities in Russia as Russia continues to struggle to balance its economy with mobilization in the war. So what exactly happened during Kim's visit to Russia? Now, clearly this is some sort of agreement had been reached, whether it was during this meeting or not, and whether it was an official agreement or not, something appears to have happened. Because now we know that North Korea is supplying Russia with weapons. In exchange, Russia may not only be giving North Korea economic support, as well as, the ability for North Korean workers to work in Russia. However, it also might be the assistance to their space program. Now, despite all of this, Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who of course is very politically powerful within North Korea, claimed that no such exchanges have been made. But again, we can only take this at face value. We know that some kind of weapons have made it to Ukraine because we have video and footage from Ukraine showing, ballistic missiles with Korean components in it and not of South Korean origin. The ballistic missile fragments match those of North Korean systems. We also have testimony from Russian soldiers online discussing the quality of North Korean artillery shells. It might be that North Korea is shipping older artillery shells that were in a stockpile, and so the quality might be questionable. And this is something that we've seen out of Russian soldiers online. Now, much of the ammunition that North Korea is sending might be replaced at a later date, either by North Korean factories or by Russian factories once the war concludes. But we're unlikely to see new or more sophisticated North Korean weapons platforms make it to Russian hands as the war happens, because again, North Korea is going to need these things for their own purposes in Korea. Now, after the visit, Kim Jong-Un described his relationship with Russia and with Vladimir Putin as being his top priority. There's also a belief in North Korea that Vladimir Putin might visit Pyongyang sometime in the near future, which would be the first time that he's done so since the year 2000. Of course, China is watching all of this and just not loving the way that this is all panning out. It's basically like watching your vassal cheat on you with Russia in real time. And of course, you're not going to be thrilled about that. This is especially true because China's been incredibly careful over the last several decades to hide any kind of support that they have for Russia in the war and for North Korea. And this is, of course, the position that Xi Jinping finds himself in right now. There's the risk that China could get implicated by North Korea for supporting Russia in the war. And that might pull China into the Western sanctions scheme. Of course, we know that China has provided some levels of support for Russia since the war started, although the evidence of weapons shipments and other kinds of military aid is pretty lacking. There's not a lot of evidence out there for that, at least publicly. However, anything that can get China sanctioned, Xi Jinping is really trying to avoid. And so their top vassal providing direct military aid, that's going to be kind of tough. North Korea, however, likely trying to get the best deal for itself, it really has an incentive to kind of play China and Russia against one another right now. And this is similar to the way they played Russia and China against each other during the Sino-Soviet War. While Russia wants to get all the ammunition and military aid it possibly can from all of its partners, and especially from North Korea, China wants to continue to have firm control over North Korea and keep things calm on the Korean Peninsula. And to be fair, Russia wants things to be calm on the Korean Peninsula as well. China's economic support has been the primary carrot that China has used over North Korea thus far. However, if Russia is giving North Korea a better deal in exchange for weapons to be used in Ukraine, then it might be time for China to step it up a notch. However, there is, of course, the risk of emboldening North Korea. And both Russia and China, as I've already mentioned before, are dealing with security issues elsewhere, and neither want the Korean Peninsula to become a potentially massive headache. However, the more that they support and embolden North Korea, the more North Korea may feel that it has the ability to threaten South Korea and the United States. However, the more support that North Korea receives from either China or Russia, that will really tell us the potential direction in which things can go. If China steps up support in the non-military space and humanitarian and economic means, and this might have to include more support for North Korea's space program, then that might be a way to pacify North Korea, at least for the time being, and keeping things on the peninsula mostly calm, but that's not guaranteed. Russia, on the other hand, might feel pressure to give military support to North Korea because, of course, North Korea is giving military support to Russia, so they'll need some sort of a replacement for those assets to help their own defense. Most of that support can come in the form of an IOU for once the war is over. However, once the war is over, that's when we're going to really start to see which direction things are going to head with Russia. Exporting new weaponry and rebuilt stockage to North Korea might be tough. It might help North Korea's military, and it might help North Korea think that it is emboldened to, again, make threats against South Korea or the United States, or even potentially launch some sort of a provocation. The more capable North Korea becomes, and the more that it feels that it has Russia and or China's backing, the more that it might feel that it is protected against a U.S. response to a war on the peninsula or some kind of a conflict. This, of course, gets infinitely more complicated if this all coincides with a Chinese move on Taiwan. So basically, to recap everything we've just talked about, while Russia and China are both deeply suspicious of North Korea, they are effectively competing against one another for North Korea's affection. However, at the same time, they're trying to make sure that this situationship does not appear more serious, because that might start a fight with its neighbors, who they're really besties with. Now, talk about drama, and this is why we love international affairs, because it is just like reality TV, but for psychopaths and nerds. We're basically watching Love is Blind, but it's not called Love is Blind, it's called Love is Juche, get back to work. And by work, I mean liking this video because you found it helpful and informative, and commenting your thoughts on this whole dynamic, because it is very interesting. And subscribe to this channel if you found this all very interesting and you want to watch more similar content to this. That's what this channel is. With all that, I'll see you all next time. Later.